Troops from across Southeast Asia have launched their first ever joint military drills amid rising tensions over China's activities in the region. All 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, are joining the naval maneuvers. Indonesia's military says the 5 days of drills will practice military skills, including maritime security and patrols, distribution of humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. They will not be practicing combat operation. But they're being held right next to the South China Sea, a maritime region that China claims about 90% of. You can see it there. That's within the blue demarcation line that's called the 9 strokes line. China claims 90% of that region. ASEAN members bordering that sea, including the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam, reject China's claims. Now, the maneuvers were originally planned to be held right along the edge of the South China Sea, but they were moved to Indonesia's South Natuna Sea to avoid any disputed waters and avoid more possible friction with China. Now, those competing claims have led to tense confrontations in the South China Sea, like this one between China and the Philippines just a few weeks ago. Chinese Coast Guard vessel blocked the Philippine ship from bringing supplies to Filipino troops stationed on a contested island. And China has been busy in recent years building military bases and other structures on islands that it claims in the South China Sea, like airstrips for warplanes, missile systems, and electronic jamming equipment. A top U.S. military commander has called the construction a hostile act. Lin Kwok is a senior fellow for Asia-Pacific Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies and an expert on the South China Sea. So the perfect person to talk about all of this. Ms. Kwok, welcome to the day. What's the signal this is sending to China?
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here. If we're looking at the drills, I think they're mainly targeted at achieving several goals. First, it seeks to boost interoperability between the various ASEAN countries exercising the goal. And as you mentioned earlier, these are all 10 of the ASEAN member states. Second, it's meant to showcase ASEAN unity. Third, it's meant to assert ASEAN's continued strategic relevance, given the rise of various security-related minilaterals, including the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and the AUKUS nuclear power deal between the United States, the UK, as well as Australia in 2021. These have all given rise to questions about the continuing relevance of ASEAN in the strategic realm. And ASEAN, I think, is seeking to counter the narrative that it is losing strategic relevance. And finally, these drills are aimed at promoting the rule of law, which is being challenged not least by China's actions in the South China Sea. However, if we look at the drills per se, I think it would be wrong, as some media outlets have suggested, to say that they are directly aimed at targeting China. I think the goals they seek to achieve are those that I outlined just a while ago. There are tensions between China and the various Southeast Asian countries, particularly those that have competing claims with China, competing maritime as well as territorial claims with China. But by and large, I think Southeast Asian countries do want good relations with their militarily powerful and economically powerful neighbor. And so, I think it's important to remember that these drills seek to achieve broad goals rather than specifically being aimed at targeting China.
And tensions have been running high in the South China Sea, though. Now, aside from, everything that you just laid out, are we seeing any diplomatic efforts to ease tensions?
Yes, there have been diplomatic efforts to ease tensions, and these have seen renewed focus. The Southeast Asian countries, as well as China, are seeking to conclude a code of conduct in the South China Sea. However, I'm not that optimistic about reaching a code of conduct, a meaningful code of conduct, at least anytime soon. These negotiations have been 2 decades in the making, and there have been various obstacles to reaching a meaningful code of conduct. Where should the code of conduct apply, for instance? Should it apply to the entirety of the South China Sea, or only those areas that are disputed between China and the Southeast Asian countries? What sort of activities should the code of conduct prohibit? Should it prohibit all contentious activities, such as the building of fortresses on various land features in the South China Sea? Or should we take China at its word and believe that we should just simply trust China when it says that these are for peaceful purposes? There are also obstacles such as, whether or not these should be, if there is a dispute in the South China Sea, whether these should be subject to the dispute resolution mechanisms under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Yeah. And finally, whether or not the code that should be a legally binding document. So there are various obstacles to reaching a meaningful code of conduct, and I'm not optimistic about reaching any agreement anytime soon.
Yeah, so the ASEAN nations, they might be united in this exercise, but as you already explained, there's, many interests at play, contentious ones at that. Where does all of that leave the bloc's ability to avoid getting caught up in the middle of the US-China rivalry?
Certainly, ASEAN is more relevant and stronger when it's united. And so, as you mentioned, the US, or you suggested, the US-China rivalry is leading to various centrifugal forces on the bloc, as well as on the various countries in the bloc. Do they choose China? Do they choose the United States? And if the countries are to be able to remain away from the fray, they have to stand firm together. So reassertions of ASEAN centrality, not just in word, but also in deed. And of course, we see challenges to ASEAN unity on the South China Sea issue in terms of the political and humanitarian crisis in Myanmar as well. It's very difficult for the countries to reach agreement given their competing or different interests. But I think it's very important for them to remember that they all share an interest in the rules-based international order, or the international rule of law, and to stand firm on that. And of course, apart from that, I think it's also important for them to seek to better ties, or to enhance ties with other countries apart from the United States and China as well, including countries in Europe and the EU bloc, for instance, so that as to increase or enhance their strategic options in dealing with an increasingly divided world.
As Lynn Kwok, thank you so much for that analysis.